Hey everyone, it's Casey here. This is the first video that I'm doing in my Claude for Clinicians video series. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cover what Claude is, Claude Cowork. Cowork's mostly where I operate, but I'll talk a little bit about Claude Code as well, and why I think it's really helpful for clinicians, and indeed I use it for a lot of my other sort of side hustles and things like that as well. So it's a really useful tool, great for documentation, great for things like practice accreditation, practice ownership, documentation, analytics, things like that. So we're going to talk all about Claude Cowork. I've got a number of videos in the series, so this is just part one, which is sort of like setting it up and getting used to things. And then I've got part 2, 3, and 4 as well. So check out those. That'll be on my YouTube channel, because I have a YouTube now. So this is Claude. If you've heard of ChatGPT or Google Gemini, Claude is another one by Anthropic. It's a really useful tool. It's very niche compared to, I think, ChatGPT and Gemini. It's more based on, I guess, professional work. So getting things done with documents, emails, blah, 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 blah. So let me walk you through how it works. So first of all, you're going to need to download Claude from Anthropic's website. The difference between Claude Cowork as opposed to ChatGPT or Gemini or anything like that is that those AI you would use in sort of like a chat-based text version. So, hello ChatGPT, can you give me some content ideas for social media or something like that, right? Whereas Claude Cowork specifically works within your computer and can do things on your computer with your files and your folders. There's positives and negatives for that. The main positive is that it can get a lot more things done because it has context of your filing system, your analytics, Excel sheets, all sorts of different things. So really useful. On the converse side, as a slight negative, is that anything that's on your local computer means that you can't use it on a different computer or if you're in a different area. So what that means for me is that I try and do everything on my laptop. I'm on my desktop at the moment, just to give you an idea, but I try and do everything on my laptop because that's what I bring everywhere. There's a few things that you can do to sort of get around that. For example, a lot of the stuff that you do in Claude, you can put in a file and you can put that file on the cloud, and therefore you could access all those files from any computer, and that's a way to sort of get around it. But we'll talk more about that. Download it, set it up, and it'll look something like this when you first log into it. So the first thing that I think you should do is set up your project files and folders and connectors. So a project file is essentially where you want your Claude to look at to generate things, depending on what you tell us to do, of course. So you can see here I've got a few that's already connected, so my medical practice and MBS Pro stuff, or you can create a new project from a different folder. So let's create a new project, and we're going to call this one practice accreditation. So I recently went through practice accreditation. That was awesome. This is a file for accreditation stuff. You can name it more professionally, but that's fine. And then we'll choose a file. So I've got this one on my desktop, and I've called it practice accreditation. And I have the RACGP 5th standards in there. And that means that I can get Claude to reference that and create some documentation, for example. So that's how you can set up a project. So this project will now live in here. I've got a couple of other projects, and practice accreditation is one. And practice accreditation looks at the folder practice accreditation because that's where I want to store everything related to that. Now you can add more folders and files, and anything that you create from Claude about practice accreditation will be stored in that area as well. So let's get it to do something, and I'll move on to show you the connectors, and then we'll come back. So one of the beauties of awesome things of Claude Cowork is that it can do stuff while you are doing other things. So you get multiple things on the go. Very, very handy in terms of multitasking. So for example, while we've been doing this video, I have been getting Claude to generate some fake care plan data about how many care plans I've done at my clinic and some analytics, because we're going to analyze that in a little bit as well. So let's get the practice accreditation file to do something. Can you review the RACGP 5th standards and create accreditation documentation as per the standards? Now you might be able to give it some more context. You can see I've misspelled a few things, but that's not an issue because it'll figure it out. You can give it some more context. For example, you might have your old accreditation files. So that's what I did. I had a whole heap of Practice Hub, and I chucked it in there. They were from like 2000 and I think even 2019, so like 2 cycles ago. And so they would need to be naturally updated because I think those were done on like the 4th edition or something like that, right? So we can update that documentation. You can add in anything that you may have already done. You might have like a friendly practice manager that that has other stuff that you can use as like a reference sheet, and that can be helpful. But that's fine for the purposes of this model. We'll get it to look at this file. Now I'll double check 2 things on here. So one is ask, so Claude will ask before it does anything. That's useful more in the context of your connectors, so when it can grab data from other things, it's probably useful to say for it to ask, but we'll go through that in a second, because there are different things that you might want it to ask and other things you might be okay with. And then the other thing is your model. So what this means is that it's the model that the AI uses, where newer models usually use more tokens. So as part of Claude Cowork, which is a paid plan, you can see here down the bottom, I'm on a max plan. That's something like $150 a month, which is the second most expensive plan. You get more tokens. Tokens are what you use to do stuff. If you're using a smarter model, it does consume more. If you're using sort of a dumber one, it consumes less. There are reasons for using dumber models. I know when you say dumber, it makes it sound bad, but they're much faster and more efficient, and use less tokens. So the idea is that if you've got something that's really difficult to do, you probably want a smarter model. If you've got something that's a bit more straightforward and you want to do it quick, you can use a quote unquote dumber model. But these are the ideas. And then there are some other models here, so usually like older ones and things like that. Now, on a side note, there are other platforms that are similar to this, like Perplexity Computer, which will use all the models. This is just Claude Cowork, so it only uses Claude. So let's get it to do some stuff, and then we'll show you the connectors. So it's doing our accreditation files. Let's go check on our fake clinic data. It's created a file here, which is, let's have that open it. So it's an Excel sheet. It's talked about how many care plans we've done. This is all fake stuff, so don't worry about patient data, because this is absolutely not true. Eligible patients, a summary of who's done what, a weekly summary, and a type summary. Now you can see, because the way that the models work, it's probably been trained on older data, because it's still referencing TCAs, which we know are not in there. So that's just something to note. AI can obviously get some things wrong. Let's come back to that in a second, and we'll talk about our connectors. So in the customize section, we'll go through all of these. In the customize section, you can add in connectors. These are connectors that I have in mine. I have pretty basic connectors, really. Things like Atlassian, Jira, ADIO, Gmail, Google Calendar, Google Drive, Intercom, Microsoft 365, Xero, Zapier. Zapier is a connector that allows me to connect to other stuff that Claude doesn't have a connector for. So what is a connector? A connector just means it looks at my Gmail and can read my emails. So just be aware of that if you don't want AI to read your emails. But what I can do is I can say, Claude, what are the emails that I have forgotten to respond to over the last week? It'll search through all my emails, because I get a ton of emails. It'll look through both my Gmail, my Outlook, etc., and collate everything. So instead of, for example, having a like an executive assistant or a virtual assistant that might do your emails, you can have Claude do it, and it works really well. It can look through your calendar and see when you got space available for meetings and things like that. So these are all the connectors I have. You can go browse connectors to get a whole heap more. Canva, that's a cool one. I don't have that. Figma, etc. There's a ton of them that are super useful. I think from a clinical perspective, probably the most useful ones are like all your calendars, emails, and then probably Xero and Stripe, depending on what you use for like sales within your practice. But Xero is useful because that is something that you might use to do like your BAS statements, or look at your P&L, do some analysis and things like that. We'll talk about that in a separate video, going over those things. So putting in connectors, you might also look at plugins. So plugins are just little extra prompts for your AI, so it can do things a little bit better. Let's cover that in a different video. We'll set up our connectors first. So if you want to set up a connector, you simply go add, and then you can log in. I've got a login there. I can go continue, it'll log me in. Okay, it sent me a code. Rest assured, put that code in, and then it'll come up as having access. We'll get out of that for now. So you can see it's come up here. It's not access because I didn't put in that code, but it'll come through, and then you can connect it. So you connect all sorts of things. Unfortunately, the connectors can expire. So you can see like my Stripe one is expired. I did have a sort of Notion and GitHub, but they've expired because I don't really use it much. So just be aware of that. So if you're prompting your AI to do things and it's not working, it might be because your Claude connector has expired. So just be aware of that. Now, with each connector, you can grant it permissions and actions. So I've got my Zapier one here. It's connected to things like YouTube and LinkedIn, etc., and a whole heap of other ones. What I want is pretty much my Claude to have or be able to discover actions, look at all the things that are connected, and pull the data that is relevant to the question that I'm asking. But you might have, for example, an email one where you don't want it to do everything. You don't want it to delete emails, and therefore you can turn off certain things, etc. Same as your calendar, you might not want it to be able to delete things. So you can look here in terms of deleting a calendar event, you turn it off. Just be aware of those things. Skills, let's cover that in a different video as well, because this is a long video already. So that is connectors. I think that's the most important thing, plus your project. Now let's have a look at our RACGP standards. We want a full policy and procedure. We want general practice, and we want Word documents. Let's say it's first time accreditation. Now it's generating those. Let's go look at our fake clinical data. So this is the file. Now let's say that this was a file that you pulled from. So I've created this one, so it's fake. But say you had a file like this that you pulled from your data analytics software. So from your practice management software, or from like a third-party provider that analyzes that data, or you've just pulled it from like your appointment book or something like that, or you've even put in, say, screenshots of like your Xero account because you haven't connected to Xero, but connect to Xero. That's a better way of doing it. But screenshots of like analytics from MYOB or whatever other analytics software you have. You can copy and paste those in, or put them into the file that your project is working out of, and say, can you provide analysis? So let's say, presume this data is real. Provide some insights and things I can do better at the clinic. So it'll look through this, and it will say, hey, you could do these things better. You can click show in folder to see where that output is. It's there as an Excel sheet, so you can, send that to someone. You can even write, can you create a draft in Gmail and send that Excel sheet? And it will chuck that Excel sheet in your Gmail and you can send it to someone as an Excel sheet. An example of something I did today was I had email like 5 people at once, and I just said, Claude, can create an email, connect this thing in, and email it to these 5 people, and do that for me, and it does it. You'll find that as you get better with AI, your prompts will become more complex, and they'll be multi-step. Can you look at this data, create insights, email your accountant, and then message people? So as an example of what I do within MBS Pro is I pull data from all of our connectors. So that might be, Stripe data, Xero data, insight data from customers, so feedback, and then I'll put it into our channels for our, marketing team or our admin team or our development team. Say, hey, look, these things need to be better. These are the things customers complain about, so on and so forth. So from the clinical point of view, you might have data on, how many care plans you're doing. So we've got this insight that we've just generated. This doctor's stand out 8 care plans a week, which is super low, but that's fine. And then we've got some insights, completion rates, blah, blah, blah. And then it might be that, hey, can you write this up in email and email the doctor? Because the doctor might want to know, this data as well. So I've said here, can you draft a Gmail and send that Excel sheet? And it will look at my Gmail connector, it'll draft it and sit it in there so I can have a look at it. So let's go back to our RACGP standards while we're working on this fake clinical data and see what's going on. So you can see it's still thinking, because it thinks quite a bit about these tasks. Either that, or it's a bit slow because a ton of people are using it. That's entirely possible as well. So we'll let it run in the background, and it can run for a while, and we can start on some other tasks. Actually, let's go back to our fake clinical data. Just to myself, we'll email internal note, and it will put that into my Gmail. So this is the introduction for clinicians, so Claude Cowork for clinicians. This is part 1. Got multiple other parts going on to hopefully show you around the other cool things that we do with Claude, and cool things that I think you can do. So coming up, we've got some analytic stuff, how to like prepare a BAS. It's not going to lodge your BAS, but it can help prepare things from your BAS from a clinical point of view, other connectors that you might use, and just other use cases. So there are some really interesting ones. Other cool things that I think of as artifacts. So we'll talk about artifacts, which live over here. An artifact essentially is something that will pull from your inbox every day, hour, etc., kind of like a scheduled task, but it pulls it as a live thing. So it's a live feed of all your inboxes, your calendar, and it creates like a command center for you. So we'll talk about that in another video as well. So hopefully that's been helpful. I know that's like a big 15-minute video. I'll be creating some more of these and talking about all the other features that it can do. So thanks very much for listening. Check out YouTube channel, the other videos, and we'll chat again. Thanks. Bye.